Ellie did such a great job introducing myself. I don't really have anything else to add to it. I wear a lot of hats in my role here at Penn State, as you can see, and um, I think the main thesis statement of all these hats I wear is that I love REDCap and I love data, and that's really reflected in all of the work that I do. And if you've had any conversation with me about REDCap in the past year, you've probably heard me scream about this tool and how bad I want it. And it's finally here, and I'm so excited to talk about it and show you how you could possibly apply it to your own projects. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of just go through, like, these are the objectives for today. This is not going to be a super technical heavy talk. It's really just to kind of introduce everyone to what the multi-language management module is, and also talk about what it isn't. We'll go a little bit into basics and how to get started with it, and also talk about, when is it appropriate to use versus when isn't it. So going forward with that, I just want to give some background. So just in Pennsylvania, more than 1 million people speak a language other than English at home. And when we're doing research and we're, thinking about our sample sizes, and we're thinking about like the populations that we're trying to do research on, it would be, really hard to not include people that don't speak English or maybe don't understand English as well as they understand another language in our samples, just because we want to be representative, we want to be inclusive, and this is a huge chunk of people that make up our Commonwealth. And as you can see, this graphic is from a map that was developed in 2021, and it kind of shows the distribution of people who speak language that is not English at home. And as you can see, it's kind of spread out. Like, obviously, Philadelphia is pretty concentrated in that area, but then you look all over and you can see like super rural areas also have a chunk of people who do not speak English or at home. And I think that this map kind of like reinforces this idea that the goal as a field is to work towards being more inclusive and more equitable in our research, and we should be very mindful of that as we are developing our study designs and thinking about who we want to reach out to. And the research backs this up as well. Researchers have found that using multiple languages in research studies has not only helped ethnic minorities comprehend what they're looking at, but it also helps them better participate in research. So, being more inclusive when it comes to your research is always a good thing. That being said, conducting multilingual research is not an easy thing. It's not simple. And I say that as somebody who has been a part of multiple multilingual research projects. There are a lot of things to consider. As some of you who may have done this before know, with any research project, getting IRB approval, that is an entire process. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. And when you add another layer like translations into it, that adds more work and more time on your hands. You also have to be mindful of, what translation company are you using? Is IRB going to approve the translation service that you're using? It's usually very costly. Quality, it can also be an issue too. I remember one study that I worked on, we got our translations, we programmed them, and we piloted them. And we found that the translations we got were not at all accurate. Nobody on the study team spoke that language. And so it was really hard for us to know that something wasn't right. And that's, why it was important to pilot it, as you would with anything. So that's, it goes just to say that, like, conducting multilingual research is not easy, just check a box and you can do it. Incorporating other languages into the research that you're conducting is definitely a heavy task with lots of things that come into it. There's also things like recruitment that you have to consider. For the purposes of this talk, we're really going to talk about like the logistics and the data pieces of conducting multilingual research, mainly because that's what I know very well. And also specifically focusing on REDCap. There are other electronic data capture tools and other tools people use to conduct research, but this is specifically focused on REDCap. So when talking about the logistics and data pieces of multilingual research, so one of the things to consider when you are collecting data for a multilingual research project is, what are you going to do with it? If you have like a lot of qualitative data, a lot of free text that you've collected, does it need coded? Can you translate it yourself? Do you have somebody on your team who can translate it? Do you need to send it out? Can you analyze and interpret the data in its raw form, or do you have to get extra tools to do so? And also, does your research team have staff that can read and speak the language you're doing research in? That's really important for things like quality checks, especially if you have a lot of like open text data that you can't necessarily see the coded value of it and know if something looks right or wrong. And then when talking about logistics, and I can speak from experience having programmed multiple multilingual research projects, REDCap is a great tool and I love it, but I also can recognize that it is not the easiest to use for this type of thing. You know, difficulties with variable naming. Biostatisticians, in my experience, really like to have all your variable names be the same. I remember for one project, I programmed the entire thing in English, and then I had Spanish fields in the same project for the same variables with, you know, branching and all of that. And I just appended underscore Spanish to the end of all my variables. And it's fine. And we send it out, and the biostatistician gets back to us and says, actually, I want all of the variables to be the same. Like, I don't want to have underscore Spanish at the end. I want everything to be the same. And so I had to go back in and redo some of that work. And that kind of is one of the faults of REDCap, right? Because in REDCap, you can't have two variables with the same name in one project, but it's not necessarily feasible to have one question and then have like 6 translations under it for a language. Another thing to think about is, you know, for that particular project, I had to do some pretty complex branching, and even like the most experienced REDCap user, like I probably mess up branching at least like once a day and have to go back and fix it. And the more complex it gets, the harder it is to catch maybe mistakes. And so I like to avoid having to have really complex branching in my projects just to save on headaches later. But when you are kind of working with multiple fields in the same project, that's something that you have to consider. Another issue that I've ran into is, okay, you want the variable names to be the same. I have had to divide things into different projects. And REDCap is not great at linking data from one project to another. It's kind of a pain to get your data combined. When you're doing something like this, where you have one project in English and one project in Spanish, you know, I have had to go through line by line and make sure that like my variables match, especially because I don't speak the language that I'm programming in. And same with the answer choices, because if I have a data set from one project and a data set in another, but maybe one of my variables got switched or my answer choices switched, and I don't know that could really mess up your data. And so that's kind of one of the fallbacks of having to use like a separate project just to have surveys in another language. And then the last issue, and one of the biggest ones in my opinion, is, you know, participant and user interface issues when working in languages other than English is like a really big deal in REDCap. So I programmed this huge project in Spanish. I worked forever on it, and we got to the point where we were testing it and piloting it. And I think anybody that's worked on a REDCap project before can probably relate to this, but when I've worked on something for a long time, I kind of go blind to it. So, you know, I've seen the surveys over and over and over again, and I might not necessarily notice something. And in this case, I was testing this project for maybe the 6th time, and I suddenly realized it had a lot of required fields and a lot of validation on it, you know, like making sure you type a number in where there's supposed to be a number or a valid email address. And I was testing it and I realized, even though my entire project was programmed in Spanish, my questions were in Spanish, my answer choices were in Spanish, my survey instructions were in Spanish, all of the alerts that popped up were in English. Like if I didn't fill out a required question, the alert that popped up for the survey participant was in English. And that's a big deal, because, you know, if every question is required and you have a lot of validation, the chances of your survey participants getting alerts is pretty high. And those are not easy to change in REDCap, even being an administrator. Like it involves our systems teams and making new language files. And even then it's a really heavy push. And so all of that to say, I'm not using this as a venting session for how hard it is to do multilingual research, though I'm sure other people have some PTSD stories that they can share about it. I'm just trying to point out that like these are issues that are commonly ran into when you are doing multilingual research using REDCap. And now like we have access to multi-language management module, which I'm going to call MLM because it's a mouthful. And this alleviates pretty much all of the issues that I just talked about. So this is a brand new feature to Penn State REDCap. So it was available starting 8 a.m. this morning. I already checked and played with it. So you can get it enabled in your project right after this if you wanted to. And it allows us to have our data entry forms and survey pages be programmed in multiple languages. It also allows your survey takers to toggle between languages so they can choose for themselves. And the program translations, they apply to field labels, choices, your survey settings, your ASI and alerts, user interface. And it is compatible with all of the great things about REDCap. So your piping, branching, calculated fields, all of that, they work just the same, just now they're in a different language. So how does it work? From the study team's perspective, once it's enabled in your project, you will be able to program multiple languages. And I do want to take a minute here to say that multi-language management is not a magic button that you click and it just translates all of your stuff for you. There's still a fair bit amount of programming that goes into it. I don't want people to kind of think, oh, this is great. This is like that Google Translate toggle I have on my browser. It really isn't. But what it does do is it makes it really easy for your participants and really easy for you to use the data afterwards. But once it's enabled in your project, you can program multiple languages. In the screenshot I have here, you can see I set up Chinese, English, and Spanish in a sample project. And you can have a language file uploaded to the project that kind of changes the user interface language. So when I talk about user interface language, I'm talking about those alerts that came up for my project in English when it was all supposed to be in Spanish. And users can either designate a field for a participant's language preference, or participants can just choose for themselves. So you can kind of have it be a very prescribed thing, or you can just, here is this other language as an option. If you would like to view the survey in this language, this is where you can do it. Once the initial language is set up, the project-specific language items can be translated. And so that is your questions and your answer choices. So I have a screenshot here from the same project. And as you can see, so my question was about marital status, and I'm going into Spanish to program the Spanish translations of it. So I will take my Spanish translations that I got from the IRB that are approved, and I will type in or copy and paste, because mine usually come in a Word document. I will copy and paste for what is your marital status, the translation for it. If I have a field note, I can have that translated as well. I didn't for this question. And then for my answer choices, I can program the translation for each answer choice. So it's very step by step. It's very linear, but it's really nice too, because now I don't have to worry about accidentally erasing the answer code and accidentally putting something else there that isn't supposed to be there. It's all right there. And if there's ever a question about a translation that I have, I can go and find it very easily. Like I said before, translations are not pre-programmed by REDCap for these project-specific items. So those will definitely you'll still need to go through all of the hoops that you have to go through right now to translate your surveys and get them approved. But it just, like I said, makes it easier. The user interface translations can be pre-programmed. So those can kind of automatically be translated in the way that you would think. You do this using language files. REDCap as a community, not just Penn State REDCap, all REDCaps everywhere, they're really big on sharing. And so they have language file repositories where people who have used MLM for a project, they translated their entire user interface for their REDCap. They can upload it there and share it. They can share their language translation certificate, and you can download it and use it if you would like to. There are two different links there. There are two different language file repositories. For this project that you're seeing in the screenshots, I used Johns Hopkins Spanish translations that had certifications with them, but there are tons of choices there that you can kind of go through and see what fits for you. Alternatively, if you did not want to use a language file, you can go through and have all of this translated by your translation company. But these are things that are not necessarily a part of your survey, right? It's, if you can see from the screenshot, like the message that comes up when you click none of the above, but you also have other choices selected. It's kind of like the little pop-ups that come up in your survey that don't necessarily impact the way somebody answers a question, but they are instructions, or they are letting them know that they put in an invalid value somewhere. And it, like I said here, you can see, can change your next page button, submit, save for later text. That is what gets translated with your user interface files. And these fields should still be checked by the study team. They're not 100% perfect at like anything you get from anywhere else. So you can see in this screenshot for the none of the above alert message, there's a placeholder for the choice label. If I left that there, that's what the participant's going to see, and they might not know what I'm talking about. So there are little things in there like that that you're still going to want to check, even if you get a file from somebody else. So from the participant perspective, participants are going to be able to choose their language by clicking the globe icon at the top of the screen. So this is a screenshot from the survey view, what a participant would see. And as you can see, there's a little globe icon. They can click this globe icon and toggle between the languages. This is how it normally works. However, I like the added feature of having them select which language they would like to speak or like to have their surveys in. And you can do that by designating a field where they select the language, or it's in a data entry form and you select the language. And then all of their surveys, ASI alerts are then programmed and sent out in that language. So like I said, this is a picture of an ASI. So from the previous example, I selected Chinese for my language for this test record. And when I did that, I had a test ASI sent out to my email address because I wanted to see how it worked. And it sent me the email in Chinese. My link is in Chinese. But then when I clicked on the link and I opened the survey, my survey for my record showed up, but it was in Chinese. I still had the option to switch between Chinese, Spanish, and English at the top, but everything was already preset to Chinese for me. And yeah, once they go to the unique survey link, they'll be taken straight to the record. So it functions exactly the same as your ASI normally do. It's just with this added benefit of now it's in the language that the participant can understand. So a really big question is, what does the data look like then? If I have a bunch of records in different languages, what does it look like when I go to pull the data? And this is a really cool feature of this module in that your coded and numeric data, they're going to be stored in REDCap's default language, which is English. So if you look at this top screenshot here, these 3 records, I took all of them, all of the surveys in a different language. So this one was English, I think this one was Spanish, and this one was Chinese. And as you can see, all of my answers are stored as English. If I export this to Excel, like I normally do with my REDCap reports, it will be shown in this format. And oops, same for all of the stats, reports, tables, that other tab of the report page, it still shows up all in English. So the data that you get back will be readable to someone who does not speak the language that maybe the participant took the survey in. Now there's a caveat there. So if you have free text answers, like a comment box or something else like that, if they're written in a language other than English, those are not automatically translated, and those answers have to be translated using like the approved methods for your study. So now I'm going to kind of move on to use cases, just because MLM is appropriate in some cases and not appropriate in others. So I have 2 scenarios kind of outlined here. So for this first scenario, Professor X is looking to do a research study and she wants to have surveys programmed into REDCap. And her research will be specifically recruiting participants from Hispanic and Nepali communities. She's already had the surveys, email language, recruitment materials translated and approved by the IRB. And the English version of the survey has already been programmed into REDCap, but the project has not yet been pushed to production. The biostatistician for the project asked that each variable name be the same regardless of the language. So because of that, Professor X is considering utilizing either MLM if she can get it enabled, or creating separate projects for each language to program the surveys in the language that she would like them to be programmed. So in this case, MLM is a great option for Professor X to consider. She can collect all of her data in one project utilizing same variable names, choice codes, all of that. And then once enabled, can have both Spanish and Nepalese programmed into the module, allowing her team to enter translations for fields, choices, ASI survey settings. But then for scenario 2, Professor Y is looking to conduct research with people who speak English or Arabic. And he's confronted with the same choice as Professor X. Professor Y's research team programmed the surveys in 2 languages utilizing separate projects. So he's a little bit further ahead in the process than Professor X, and he hasn't yet pushed to production. This route has taken a lot of time. It requires a lot of double checking to make sure that each variable and answer choice code match. The team also has already developed an entire procedure from getting participants to the project programmed in the language of their choice. However, upon testing, Professor Y's team found that even though all the Arabic questions have been programmed, none of the survey interface can be changed from the default English language used by the system. So it's a little bit different than what Professor X was having. She had everything in one project. Professor Y is having 2 projects, and he's not sure if MLM is really useful here. However, it is, because you don't need to translate the entire project with MLM. So if you already have a project that's not yet in production, but you would like to utilize languages to change kind of that system survey interface language, you can translate just what you need to be translated. So in this case, MLM can be used to establish an Arabic language configuration through which that alternative language file can be uploaded, and those survey interfaces can be translated, and they can either be translated by a language file, or the study team can get the translations and do it themselves. So something to think about, is MLM appropriate for my project? The main thing is that as of right now, the administrators are not enabling MLM in projects that are already in production collecting data. This is just because it's new to us as well. We don't know how it really impacts your data if we turn it on and you suddenly start having translations. So to be safe, we are not enabling it in projects that have data or in production already. This is not a disqualifier, but having mostly quantitative and coded data in your project is probably the best route for using it. If you have a lot of qualitative free text data, you can still have MLM enabled. Just understand that those free text responses are not going to be translated by REDCap itself. And so the reports that you may make from that data might not be entirely useful without the extra step of going through translation outside of REDCap. And of course, like, you still have to go through your same process for getting your languages translated. So this is not a scenario through which you have a survey and you just plug it into Google Translate and program it in here. You still need to go through the approved methods, and in every study I've worked on, it's been through the IRB to get translations through a certified translator, and then program those into your surveys. It's not really appropriate to use something like Google Translate. If you think about it from a data perspective too, you put something in Google Translate and there's like a 50% chance it's saying what you actually want it to say. And so the data that you get from a question that's been like Google translated might not actually be right. And again, MLM is not going to automatically translate everything for you. You're still going to have to program. You're still going to have to incorporate that into your timelines when you're developing your study designs. But it is just another tool that we have to maybe make this process a little bit easier. And so we have a lot of resources for you. So the #1 resource is the REDCap support portal. So if you need help, obviously use this. The administrators can help you determine if MLM is appropriate for your project and also answer questions about setting it up. MLM cannot be enabled in a project without administrator approval at this time. So even if you are kind of like, cool, I'm good to go, I want to use this, you still have to submit a ticket and ask one of us to enable it for you. We have a dashboard here in this second bullet point of all the resources that we currently have for MLM. So, and more will be added as we find more stuff. If you find something that you think is a great resource and it might not necessarily be from Penn State, we still want to share that with people. So I encourage you to share that with us and let us know that you found it useful, and we can add it there so that other people can get help from it too. There is an MLM practice project. It's an XML file that you can kind of import into REDCap, and MLM is already enabled in it when you import it. And you can practice it. You can play around with the configurations and the different settings. MLM, like everything in REDCap, is not super intuitive to set up. It takes a lot of practicing and troubleshooting to get it to do what you want, like everything else in REDCap. So I would encourage like practice. You can download the XML file. It's available on that resource page that I have linked above it, and you can practice it for yourself. And if you get stuck, please submit a ticket and we are here to help you. And then just some 2 new exciting resources that are going to be available to you in the near future. The REDCap support team is now offering office hours. These are going to be on the first Wednesday of every month. So let's say you get MLM enabled in your project and there's this weird thing happening with it, but you don't necessarily want to submit a ticket. You can stop in, ask a question. It might benefit somebody else who's going through the same issue and is at office hours, and all the REDCap support team will be there to kind of help you. And then we are also going to be launching a Penn State REDCap user community via Microsoft Teams. So there will be more information on that coming in the future, but basically this will be a place where REDCap users here at Penn State can kind of collaborate with each other. You know, if you have a question, you can post it there and somebody else can answer. Users of all experience levels and comfort levels are welcome there. And it's really a place where we can kind of connect with each other and get resources. You know, did you do something cool on REDCap that you want to share that you think other people might find cool? Is there a better way to do something that you're currently doing? Before I became an admin, I found a random Google group that was basically the same thing, and I was always in it because I had a lot of questions that were very specific that maybe couldn't be answered by the random stuff I found on Google, but this user group had a lot of people in it who were doing all kinds of different things. So we really wanted to bring something like that to here at Penn State, specific to our instance of REDCap. And so we're really excited, and we'll be sending out more information about that in the future. And then these are just my sources. Feel free to check them out. The language map that I showed is the first one. It's an interactive map. You can go and filter and show what languages are most common where. It's a really cool tool. And that is it. So thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'm so happy to answer them. I will preface that by saying multi-language management is super new here. So if you have a question I can't answer, which is very likely, I'm going to say I don't know, but I'm definitely willing to follow up and help you figure it out. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your initiative on this, and to the other REDCap administrators who will be supporting it. Please do list any questions you might have either in chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Laura any questions that you might have based on our presentation. I see a lot of clapping hands, Laura.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm Rachel Alley. I'm the executive director of the HRPP, which oversees all the IRB programs. So my question, this is great. And we're trying to do some work around our policies around translations and enrollment of non-English speakers. And so this is a really awesome tool. What is the best way for us to point researchers to these resources if we're reviewing studies that might, you know, benefit from using this tool?
I definitely think especially if somebody's using REDCap, I think definitely send them to our support portal, because if they're going to use it, they're going to have to request it through there anyway. But it's also a place for them to be like, I don't know what this is and I want to learn more about it. So I can send you our REDCap support portal link. I think it's also in there, and that would I would direct them to us, and we can help them decide if it's appropriate for them to use in their study, or if it's not one of those use cases that I showed in the slides, like we can still see if it's applicable for them to use, just because it is really useful for getting translated languages out to people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the big, you know, roadblocks that we come up against is figuring out how to get all the pieces translated. So this is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a copy of slides and the recording? Yeah, Ellie's going to be sending those out in the next couple days, I think. Lena, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, great presentation, Laura.
Thank
Awesome
you.
topic. I missed the initial part because I was in a different meeting, but this is definitely very needed. I need to say that our research team for that type 1B of this study has enrolled an important number of kids whose primary language is not English, and we were not able to kind of, totally we didn't really have the chance to work on translating our questionnaire, but of course I'm bilingual, so then that has been part of the important feature of my team. But helping educating our research coordinators more in terms of how to reach those patients whose primary language is not English, and diversify the recruitment to represent our real population, that would be great. So thank you for that effort.
Oh, thank you.
Doesn't appear we have any additional questions. It looks like you were thorough in your overview, Laura. So thank you. Oh, Abby Fisher, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Hi, great job. So I have a really just a general question. How many language are you aware of the extent of how many languages are available, or is it I don't want to say the most common ones, but
Yeah.
English, French.
So it's kind of mixed, right? So I had a slide that linked 2 different repositories that are run by Vanderbilt, they are the creators of REDCap, and they kind of oversee the entire consortium of all the organizations who are a part of the REDCap community. And people don't have to upload their stuff there, but if they want to, they can. And so for that one's a fairly new repository, so it doesn't have as many languages in there. I saw Spanish. I got my Chinese language file from there. I saw somebody was working on an Arabic one in there. There was a partial translation available. So there are a couple languages that are translated in that repository. And then there's a bigger language file repository that is used. And that one has a lot of choices, because I think that one's an older repository. So it has tons. And I think an important thing to note when using these repositories is that some of the language files might be older, and they might not match entirely with your version of REDCap or the version of REDCap that we're on at Penn State. So it's really important to look at the date, look at the version that they're using. If it's like that first number is really important. So I think we're on version 13 now. So like seeing something that's translated on version 12, version 13, version, I think 14 is in some places as well, is kind of where you want to find your language files. If you see something that was like translated on version 8, you probably don't want to use it because it might not be an exact match. And the nice thing about MLM is if it doesn't have a translation there, it's not going to give you like a random blank line, like when you pipe data that doesn't exist into a form. It'll show your default language, whatever you set as your default. And so there is a fallback there. But as for the amount of languages available, another thing that I think is important to note is that just because a language doesn't exist in there doesn't mean you can't use it in your project. So that might mean that you have to send out all of the user interface stuff for translation. However, that file will now exist. And it's even something that if you're interested in sharing it so that other universities and other REDCap users can use it, it's available to them. So I kind of answered your question in 3 parts, but the answer is there is a lot of language choices there, but definitely doesn't encompass all the languages in the world or all the languages we might encounter when recruiting participants across the Commonwealth. And so if it isn't there, that doesn't mean the answer is no, you can't use this. It's just it might mean a little bit more work for you to get it into your project. And yeah, I do want to reiterate what Allison Eggleston put in the chat about resourcing native speakers as reviewers and consults on projects. I would be lost without the people who pilot my studies that are programmed in other languages, because translations are not perfect. REDCap programming by another human being is not perfect. And so having people to look at it and be like, hey, this doesn't look right. This doesn't make sense. This isn't saying what you're trying to say is so valuable. And I know it, you know, having maybe people staffed on your research team that speak another language might be more difficult, but that's the amazing thing about working at an academic medical center is we are surrounded by graduate students. And in my experience, they have been so willing to test things out for us, to help us out, to give input, and especially our graduate students who are multilingual or bilingual, they've been a huge resource in the projects that I have worked on that have been programmed in other languages, and they are usually our pilot testers. So I definitely 100% agree with what Allison put in the chat. And it's, again, using this module, it's another helpful tool, but it's not an end all be all. And your testing and implementation of a project should be multifaceted. Otherwise, you don't want to put garbage out there, because what is it, like garbage in, garbage out? You don't want to have a half-baked survey out there. You know, I was really uncomfortable putting that survey out that had everything programmed in Spanish and then all of the survey interface stuff in English. Like, that to me would be embarrassing to have a participant see that. We're working so hard to make them feel included, and then they go and take our surveys and they can't even read half of it. That's not fair to them, and it's not fair to us with the amount of work, money, and effort that we put into getting research out to people. So yes, 100% agree.
All right, so I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's session. And thank you, Laura, for agreeing to present last minute, although I'm really excited to get this in front of researchers at Penn State as soon as possible. So really exciting stuff. We do have another translational science session on July 27th. It will be on the Institute for State and Regional Affairs. It will be an overview. So we're excited to welcome Philip, I'm sorry, I may get this wrong, and I'm going to ask him how to pronounce it, Cyrianides, to the CTSI's session to speak to us all. So hope to see you all there. Please check out our CTSI newsletter for more information. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.